speaker today is Neil Helm. Now, many people consider hard science and metaphysical spirituality to be incompatible with each other. Neil Helm is not one of those people. He is a near-death experiencer. He serves on the board of Virginia Beach chapter of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. He served for several years as scholar-in-residence at Edgar Cayce's ARE, where he conducted research and assisted faculty and students with their own research projects. But he's also an expert in the field of satellites and satellite communications. He's been director or contributor to many scientific institutions, senior research scientist at George Washington University, and president of Helm Communications, a consulting firm for satellite communications, member of IEEE editorial board of international journals, and has served as an expert witness to congressional committees. But that's rather old news. The current news flash is he has recently completed a PhD program in transpersonal psychology. But mainly, he's just a great guy who helps countless people in countless ways at countless times. Please welcome Neil Helm.
Thank you, Lloyd. I'm not sure I believe who that fellow is, but whatever. This is fun. This is good. I'm always pleased to speak to this wonderful, wonderful group, my spiritual center. And normally, I never use written material. If you remember, I always wing it. But I can't do that today when I'm talking about my dissertation, because I had a committee and I have a university and I have the people that I interviewed, and I'm being recorded. So I've got to sort of shoot straight bullets today, and I'm pleased to do so. I'm not going to spend, because of the short period of time, I'm not going to spend any time on historical NDEs other than to say that we can go back to the earliest oral traditions, even before the written word, and we find references to near-death experiences all through the early civilizations and peoples. We find references to near-death experiences. And then we come up to the current time of Raymond Moody's book in 1975, which coined the term near-death experience. And my own, which is a pivotal part of this whole research, doctoral research that I did, my own near-death experience at age 5, I drowned in a hot springs in Montana and had the very traditional near-death experience of going up through the tunnel and meeting God. And I'm going to go all past that. I'm going to go past my MA that I completed in 2013 at Atlantic University. And my culminating project or thesis there was the meeting of entities, of spiritual entities, divinities, members of your family who've departed. And so I've done a dissertation even before this work on my near-death experiences. So then in the fall of 2013, I started at Sophia University out in Palo Alto, California. Sophia was established in 1975 as a graduate program, primarily as a master's and doctoral program in psychology. Abraham Maslow was one of the main founders and well-known psychologist, academic psychologist. He was at New York City, Brandeis, and Columbia, and then went out to Stanford. By the way, Palo Alto is just a few miles from Stanford University in California. And he went out there in early retirement, and while Maslow was the founder of what he called historical psychology and human psychology, he realized that there had to be something more than self, something more than ego. So he and Stanislav Grof and a bunch of others founded this new university in Palo Alto. Also Stanford at that time, it's my belief they still were largely behavioral psychologists. That is to say, everybody was assigned 3 rats, and you built mazes, and you taught the rats to dance and prance, and that was your behavioral. From that, you were supposed to understand how people tick and all that. So Maslow and others thought, well, we have to go beyond that. We have, go beyond our human actualization was his big word, Maslow's word. We have to go beyond that. We have to be transpersonal. We have to involve our dreams and our meditations and our thoughts and our pondering. We had to go beyond the self to really find the answers to sort of why we are here. So this is a wonderful school, still, and I'm a little biased, but it's still, I believe, the finest school of transpersonal psychology in the world. It's not very large. It's still only, fewer than 70 or 80 students. My first class in 2013, we started with 23 of us. At the end of the 3 years of classes, 3.5 for some people or more, there were about 15 of us, and at the end of 3 years, and now at nearly 5 years, I'm the 5th to graduate out of the 23. So it's not, they don't give away PhDs easily, and I'm sort of pleased that they don't, because it's a rigor that you should endure. It's a rigor. It's a rigor indeed. Okay, so in my dissertation, you write 25 pages to even get your title of your dissertation approved, and then it goes on from there. And I thought they might give an old duffer like me some credit for being an old duffer, but no. You can do either qualitative, where the quality of something, and usually the experience in psychology, most of us do qualitative, or you can do quantitative, where instead of really expressing the experience, you express it in ones and zeros and x's and y's, and you come up with this big equation about so many people said this and so many people said that, and you get this big algorithm. I certainly did qualitative, and I went far beyond qualitative to the heuristic methodology, and the heuristic school out of Germany. It means that you go even beyond the phenomenon, the experience. The experience itself is absolutely important. You have to get, and then if you really follow heuristics correctly, you have to get to the center of the experience. And having had a near-death experience myself, I felt I could do that. So you have to put yourself in. When I did my interviews, about 12 people that I interviewed in great detail, I had to put my own near-death experience in their experience, and then come to a synthesis, what is called a creative synthesis. And I'll cover that briefly in major trends. Some of this I'm going to have to read. So I interviewed 12 people. I went through the IONS group. I didn't know these people. I wasn't supposed to know these people. I had not contacted. I was not allowed to contact anybody. I'm not allowed. I had to write in blood that I will never tell anybody who these 12 people are, and I'm not supposed to give away any part of their identities. I asked them all to take a 3-letter synonym, and I always dealt with them in their 3-letter synonyms, never by their real names. So I've got 12 people going through this really rapidly. Andy, and I think he meant Andy when I asked him for a 3-letter, and then he realized it was 4. And he dropped out one letter, and it was still like a girl's name and a woman's name. And so And said, all right, and dropped the Y, Andy. Male, 56, was 22 when he had his near-death experience from Texas. He's divorced, he's a teacher, and has done graduate work. Anne, female, 58, 31 when she had her NDE, from New York, divorced, administrator with graduate work. Kat, female, 56, had 2 NDEs, married, a writer with a bachelor's degree. Jen, female, 57, writing coach, graduate school. JMR, male, 41, had 2 NDEs, born in Spain, the only one outside of the United States, but he came to the U.S. at age 4, so he was really very much of an American. a music director. May, female, 54, had 6 near-death experiences. North Carolina, she's a medium now with a bachelor's degree. Mlr, female, 77, 40 when she had her NDE. She's now a counselor. Pan, male, 58, cleric. Psy, 80, now has had 4 NDEs, married, writer. RSR, male, 73, he's a rabbi. All these postgraduate work. WOW, W-O-W, female, 71, from Missouri, divorced, a realtor. And Zia, female, 74, businesswoman with a bachelor's. All 12, and you don't get this kind of sample. And again, I didn't know these people. They called me and said they wanted to help me with my dissertation. I had to take them chronologically. The first 12, when I had to administer them the test to see if they really had a near-death experience. One failed the test. And then in my early discussions before the sort of a pre-interview, I said, I want to really get to the essence of your experience. I'm going to ask you some hard questions, and I'm really wanted to delve inside of your feelings, inside of your aspirations, inside of your desires, inside of all this. And then one of the 12 said, no, I don't want you to go there. So I took them the 13th and the 14th in the order that they called me. So now briefly, the circumstances of their NDEs, A&D, car accident. I was going about 50 miles an hour in a heavy rain, and I was counter-steering. I went to the left, the right, and eventually I rolled over many times. Found left in the field. A woman came along, and even though he had a broken neck, she sort of picked him up, put him in her car, and took him to the hospital. And car accident. Now, some of these I could cry. Car accident. She was going along with a colleague, going to a meeting on the freeway, and an 18-wheeler had pulled off on a ramp and then found the ramp closed and was backing back down the 18-wheeler and backed right onto the freeway. And she hit him head on. Her colleague was killed, and she was hospitalized for like 6 months. Cat, drowned. The first time I drowned at age 5, but then she had a second time. She lost twins in stillbirth. Jen, overdose. I was in perfect health. I accidentally overdosed. She was in a nightclub, and not the only person to do this. She was in a nightclub in New York City, went in with her boyfriend. She was out of school, 22 years old, and went to this nightclub. Now, this was back in the late 80s, bought what they hoped was a gram of cocaine, and it turned out to be lidocaine. And while some people supposedly were only supposed to take a part of that, she took the whole gram in one hit. And very quickly, within a few minutes, she started losing her vision. And then she said to her boyfriend, I can't feel my teeth, I can't feel my mouth. And then all of her body started shutting down. And very quickly, she could no longer breathe and said, please get me outside. And I think it was in the fall, and an anaphylactic shock of the cold weather is what saved her life. And she got, and they saved her life. I read, of the 1,000 NDEs that I read from my research, I read a similar one of a person perhaps in the same nightclub, got the same lidocaine, went out, collapsed on the floor. The bouncer came and found no heartbeat whatsoever and started pounding on his chest to redo the heart. And they got a heartbeat back, and they took him to the hospital, and his heart was fine, but the bouncer had crushed his whole rib cage trying to get him to breathe again. So that's happened. JMR drowned, the first one, and then he's had a second one as well. My first was prenatal. My mom tried to abort me. Now, she goes back in her memory, and she does this through deep meditation and regression. She goes back to 3 months, 4 months in her mother's uterus, in a mother's womb. And she has that memory of her mother trying to abort her in the bathtub. And she had this feeling as an adult, and she went to an aunt. Her mother won't talk to her about it, and she went to an aunt, and she said, "Did my mother do this?" And the aunt said, "Yes, I went into the bathroom and saw her doing this, trying to abort you." So she has her memory of that first NDE. She had numerous ones after that. Mlr suicide. Accidents, most of everyone are accidents or illnesses. This is the one of the 12, was a suicide. And in her own words, "This wasn't the first time I tried suicide. However, I meant it this time." Mlr, and again, I cried through some of these interviews, just an incredibly abusive husband, alcoholic, who just beat her, merciless. Beat her so hard he would put her in the hospital. Beat her so hard that he would break her organs. Just beat her. And she finally had to she thought the one way to get away from him was to commit suicide. She tried to do it and ended up never being successful, but she finally was able to do it. Pan, hypothermia, in an accident on a mountain, froze to death. And he talks about, "I was really dead." Some of these people, acknowledge that they came near death. Pan said, "I died, I'm dead." Sy miscarried and then got infections from miscarrying, and for a long time was just extremely ill and had 3 near-death experiences. Wow, acute respiratory disease, caring for her ex-friend, and I'll get into that. And she had a very, very incredible near-death experience. I'll explain it a little bit. Zia, car accident. I got a blow in the back that popped my liver, and then her husband wouldn't take her. In this case, her husband wouldn't take her to the hospital finally, and she finally passed out, and he did, and she was so near death when her liver was broken. So the NDE experiences, let's go quickly through the experiences. Anne, tunnel, cave, light at the end, angelic, beautiful, energy, everything's connected. So these themes that we have in our near-death experiences that I had, and that nearly everyone has, we're all connected, we're all one. My friend was with me, the friend in the car accident who was killed. Only one could return. May, my first prenatal, my mother tried to abort me. The second, Jesus, it was totally him. Her fourth one, I actually saw every energy outline of everything. Again, a lot of them see the totality of things, all knowledge, all things. And then Jesus said to her, as God said to me, "It is not your time." And back she came. JMR, he's really, he is very advanced in his thinking, probably the most advanced person I've ever met. He sees patterns and helixes, and he sees numbers within them. He communicates, he thinks in all knowledge. He does, though, experience fear, chaos, comfort, and unity. And he now believes that he's the keeper, one of the keepers of the flame, that he's got an obligation now to keep knowledge, all knowledge going, and that he's the keeper of the flame. Pan, gigantic door, portal opened in front of me. I was in the presence of the divine. A review, an experience, a life experience he had was painful. 2 of my people had a painful, we have a review of your life on the other side. And in my case, I thought it was very, very positive, although, and I've mentioned it here before, it's not what you did. It's not sort of who you are. It's not that you're a wife or a husband, or that you're successful, or that you have a doctorate, or that you were successful at work, or all of these. None of that's important on the other side. What's important on the other side is what you said to another child when you were a child. What you said to your fellow students when you were in school, what you said to a loved one, or a parent, or grandparent, or a little child. It's how you communicated these very, very small things. That's what they're looking for on the other side. And that's how, there's no judgment. There's absolutely no judgment. So he found the experience painful. It can be painful because all of us, saying, hey, I got a doctorate, wait a minute, I should, St. Peter should give me but it's not that way. It's none of that. Sigh's experience, screaming, piercing, dark. She had about, I don't know, some of the scholars say up to 15% of everybody has a dark negative NDE, somewhere between 5 and 15%. I thought it was initially closer to 5. I'm now finding more and more people, and 2 or 3 of my people initially had a dark one. But Jesus came to me, she says, as an elderly brother. And she had a scary life review as also, but she ended up in unconditional love. Wow. Wow, it's cool. She had an incredibly negative initial near-death experience. I went to hell. I was in hell. It was a war zone. It was fires burning and rubble, and it was just awful. And the devils were there, and with their whips. And it was just an awful, awful place. And Wow is a extremely conservative Roman Catholic, goes to Mass every morning. So the first thing the devils had her do, and she was from an area where there were a lot of blackberry bushes, and they put her in about an acre of really thorny blackberry bushes, heavy bushes. She couldn't see outside them. And the devil said, if you can cut yourself out of this, you can advance some. And they gave her a little kindergarten scissors that you give to kindergarten kids to cut paper with, the little square tops, so you don't poke yourself. And so he had these little bitty scissors to cut through an acre of great big blackberry bushes, of course, which was impossible. And then she went to, in the next part of hell, she was in a surgical area where they were doing abortions, and her job was to stand with a little pan and take parts of the baby parts and take them from one part to another. And as a, of course, Roman Catholic, she just thought this was just about the most hellish experience that they could ever ask her to do. And then the third part was she was a prostitute for soldiers. She was a group of, say, 50 women, and they were being marched in sort of a Russian scene. They were being marched through heavy snow up to their waist, and they were cold and wet and dreary, and they were going to this building where they were to be prostitutes. And they got there, and before the soldiers came, one of the women said, on Earth today, it's Christmas. It's Christmas Day. And so Wow said, I started to sing a Christmas carol. And the devils beat us, you can't sing. And they all started singing more and more. They started singing louder and louder. And they morphed themselves right out of hell. Singing a Christmas carol. The next thing she knows, she was in heaven, and the man that she had just been administering to, who had died of cancer a few months earlier, he was there waiting for her. Her statement, this man was named Patrick. And she burst through and she said, my God, it's Patrick. And he was a very good man. He's in heaven. And now a few of the after effects. The after effects of my title of The After Effects of NDEs on Religious and Spiritual Beliefs. So the after effects I'm looking at now. So Anne says, I am not religious, okay? And goes to church every week. Because he wants to take his grandchildren. And he says, but loving kindness is my spiritual practice. So I'm very spiritual. I just tell people I love them. And also I've learned to be kind to myself. Now, Anne was right on the poverty level all of his life. He taught to both deaf and to mute children. But I don't think he was part of a really good school system, and as a teacher, he lived on the streets for a while, by his own admission. He lived on the streets. Kat. A little boy drowning. Now, again, some of these people just wow me. I've read a lot of near-death experiences. Cat. She was at a family reunion, and going down the table, big family reunion, 30, 40 people. And she said, does anybody hear a child's voice? We said, no, I don't hear it. And she said, well, I hear a child's voice. And she put down her food, walked through the parking lot, over to a big ditch, and here's one of her little cousins face down in the water in a ditch. And she pulled him out and resuscitated him and saved him. And a year later, she was driving with her husband through a town 20, 30 miles away. And she said to her husband, she said, stop at this house right here. And her husband said, well, you don't know that. We don't know that house. He said, stop right now. She went up to the door and knocked. And it turned out to be second or third cousin that she didn't know very well. And she didn't know that she had lived there. And this particular cousin was a little bit challenged. And she knocked on the door and she said, what are you doing? And the cousin said, well, I'm babysitting for this child. And Kat said, well, where's the child? She said, well, she's in the bathroom. So Kat runs into the bathroom, and the child had been eating the grass from a Easter basket and had suffocated and was lying blue on the floor. And Kat picked up the child and started pulling all this plastic grass out of his throat and resuscitated that child. And Kat goes around doing this stuff. You know, I'm trying to save the world. And I think she and her husband adopted 9 children. She just really, really special. And she says, her after effects, she says, I don't go to church, I am church. Jen knew God was real. Jen was the one who overdosed in the nightclub. She separates God from religion, though. She's very spiritual. And then I have a guardian angel, and I see ghosts. And she was walking in New England out on the Cape. She's walking through the sand early in the morning, and a person was coming sort of diagonal to her, and there were the only 2 people on the beach. And they got closer and closer, and she realized that she was going to sort of intersect. And this person was wearing a slicker and sort of like an old fisherman. And they got closer and closer, within 5 feet of each other. And she sees a very old man, and she sees him, and she said, how are you this morning? And the man walks right by her. And she goes by about 5 steps and said, you know, what a bugger. That, you know, well, we're the only 2 people out here. Can't he even give me a good morning or an expression like that? And so she spins around. There's nobody there. There's nobody there. And she goes back and she sees the tracks in the sand. And her tracks were the only ones. So she sees ghosts. And her thing was that she finally allowed people to love her. She kept people at a distance for most of her life. Mlr. First thing I did was ask God to forgive my husband, even though he beat me day in and day out. Beat me so hard he put me in the hospital. Then she finally left him, learned how to meditate. I came to channel. And she now believes in her channeling that she's one of the 12 Essenian girls that were chosen to be the mother of Jesus. She was in that group. Mary was in the group. She said, I wasn't chosen, Mary was chosen, but I was in that group of Essenian girls. She has many past lives. RSR. Left as a rabbi of a large temple to teach Jewish mysticism. There is no death. We all have a soul from God. We all go to heaven. So it's really interesting. He's a lot of research and a lot of thinking from this very, very sane rabbi. So findings. I'm going to finish. I said in my dissertation that I have no conclusions. There are no conclusions to my work. The sample size was 12, and that's not a large enough sample to get any validity. And so I said that I have findings and themes and summaries, but no conclusions. Very quickly, the 10 conclusions. 8 of the 12 interviewees experienced difficult childhoods, and they looked to religion for guidance and support. The second one, all 12 had a combined 26 NDEs, resulted in accidents and illnesses and 1 suicide. 7 accidents, 18 illnesses, 1 suicide. Is suicide really an accident or an illness? I had to put it separate. All 12 underwent some form of outer body experience. Now that's larger than normal, but again, this sample is so small that all 12 of mine had an outer body experience, and all acknowledged some type of presence of a divinity or a family member, all 12. All 12 emerged with a positive outcome or experience from their NDEs, although 3 had a hellish initial experience and some dark parts of their past life reviews. But all came out with a positive conclusions, positive ending. All 12 affirmed having psychic abilities after their NDEs. I certainly was blessed with psychic abilities after mine, and all 12 have extensive psychic abilities, as we heard from Wow and others. All 12 became more spiritual, but 6, now this is interesting, became less religious. This is probably the culminating aspect of my entire dissertation that took a year and a half of research and writing into my 5th year of my research. This is probably the one sentence that is the summary of all of my work. All 12 became more spiritual, but 6 became less religious, and 6 kept their religion. That's quite an interesting, again, we're not statistically enough, but from this group of 12, I found that very interesting. I thought going into this that I would find perhaps 3 that had remained religious, but 6, half the group, still go to church, right, and still consider themselves to be religious. 11 underwent disharmony and unrest from their families, within their families, as the results of their NDEs. Their families don't understand them. They don't, and PMH Atwater wrote a lot about this, where in some cases people who've had NDEs even leave their families and children and to follow what they found in their NDEs. They have to follow a spiritual direction, and their families don't want to go along in that direction. So it's hard. And in the case of children who've had NDEs, their parents think it's just a hallucination and don't want to listen to them. All 12 believe their NDEs made them better people, primarily by enhancing feelings of empathy and love for all humankind. That's a good conclusion, although I don't have any conclusions. 11 of the 12 interviewees have shared their NDE story with IANS groups and papers and books. And finally, all 12 agreed that their NDE communities provide, as we have in IANS, provides them with a place where they can share their story with people who believe them and understand them, and it's a place where they go, so they gravitate to. So I have 1 minute. I'll take a question or two if there is one. We have 1 minute left.
When you let me look over your dissertation, I noted that you had trouble defining spirituality, but I think you just did it right there. Empathy and, what else did you say? Empathy and
love for humankind.
Love for humankind.
Yes. I think that, thank you, Dick. That's a great response to that summary, that this is what all these people found. And I agree. They really became more spiritual and more loving people as the result of their NDE. Good. Please, question.
Besides your dissertation and in your other organization, do you find that people who've had a really negative, dark experience, they always go to a higher, or do some come back from that negative and not have experienced a more positive?
Yeah, it's a good question. The question was, if I got it all, is when we have a near-death experience or perhaps a spiritual experience, do we always go higher? And and my take on that is yes, because we all are evolving in that direction. Certainly, some start out at lower levels, and I don't know whether I don't normally use the word hell. I don't really believe in it. I think we're just further and further away from God, and our soul, and I'll end on this, our sole purpose is always to get closer and closer to God. Even on the other side, when we go back and we're with our soul groups, we work on little things like love and forgiveness. Even on the other side, even though we're with the perfection of God, we always work on little things that we come back then when we reincarnate, and we work on in this reincarnation. But always, our end is always to be closer and closer to God. Thank you very much.